Let's go.
Welcome back, everybody, to another video with your host, Ahdontron from NerdTots. We're on for another review. For today's video, I've actually chosen to watch the movie Flavors of Youth, the international version I found on Netflix. You can find it elsewhere if you want to look around. Now, this one wasn't suggested to me. It was just another one on my queue list. I decided, let me check this out. It's been on there for a while, I would say for the last month or so. And this movie, it's not a new film. It came out in 2018. Funny enough, what caught my attention about the movie and wanted me to put it on my queue list was the intro line on the Netflix description, which read as, "Memories in a bowl of steamy noodles, a fading beauty finding her way in a bittersweet first love in these stories of city life in China." But the part that caught my attention was memories in a bowl of noodles. Apparently that's all that it took to hook me onto wanting to see this movie. I'm a foodie at heart. Going into that, I'm still going to talk about spoilers, just like always. If you don't want to be spoiled and you just want a quick synopsis with some highlights at the end, well, fast forward to the end. As always, I'll have that timestamp in the description. One of these days, I'm going to figure out how to get it to run across the screen, which is, I'm sure, is super easy, but I'll do that shortly. I'll figure it out. I'll get that done eventually on an upcoming video and make it easier on everybody, ideally. On that note, just a couple details before I go into the story. The movie is actually a collection of 3 short stories, each one set in a different city, all in China, with different people. And from what I gather, roughly same time frames, maybe a little bit different time frames. Each short story has their own director. The sum total time of all 3 short stories combined sums up to be around 74 minutes long. That's actually not that long when you consider it. And you can probably watch each short story independently of each other, but it does pay off to watch them all together in the long run. Let me actually talk into the story, and it'll pay off at the end when I explain about that part. The first story is titled Sunny Breakfast. Your introduction to the story is, you got a guy, he's sitting at the airport, looking outside the window, staring at a plane as it's flying. You're gonna come to realize, as you're watching the first story, that's mostly narrative, which I'm okay with. He starts recapping how he feels about city life, how things just kind of bland, and as he's retelling his sensations of being in Beijing, China, and how city life is and how he feels, he is very descriptive to the point where it sounds like he's describing a dish or the sensation of eating food. And then he starts comparing it to where he used to grow up, which was in Hunan. And he talks about his childhood where he was with his grandmother. Not because he couldn't be with his parents were working, his grandmother usually babysitted him. And every morning they would always have noodles. It was his favorite thing to eat. And she wouldn't make it. She would go down to the local shop and they would make them noodles. And apparently that local noodle shop was like the best around, even though it's not like a really profitable neighborhood. And he starts talking about how he remembers how the noodles were homemade. They were all freshly made noodles. The vegetables were all picked, and they do a really beautiful job of showing off the dish. His memory is like so vivid about this. They describes everything almost like to the point like you're watching like a Food Network show. Like the description of everything is just so highly detailed. So I was captivated by the dish and made me want to have noodles. But of course it's not all about that. He talks about how his favorite moments are with his grandmother as he's eating these noodles because he remembers the sensation and how everything, like she would go out her way to do this every time. And then one day the noodle shop closes down. No one knows why. The owner packs up shop with his wife and they leave. People come to suspect that it was maybe the owner got called back by like his previous boss. Maybe they got kicked out of town because other people in the village were jealous of how well they were doing business. Honestly, they never explained this. Then they pan off to him in middle school and they show him eating outside another noodle shop every morning. And he compares those noodles to the ones he used to have as a child. Still says they're good, but not the same. They're noodles that are machine made, but the broth is good and the noodles is good. It turns out the lady who ran the noodle shop was a mother of one of the students at his same school. Father was never around. He was doing other stuff, always for work and other ventures. And he actually lets it out. The real reason why he always goes to the same noodle shop, because the girl he has a crush on rides her bicycle past there every day. He doesn't really talk to her. She just rides by and he just wants a glimpse of her. You know, that whole childhood crush. Shortly after you get this description from him, he comes to the noodle shop again and sees that they're packing up shop and they're going to turn it into a fishing shop because the father has a genius idea because the husband of the noodle shop lady has a genius idea to change business, which they weren't doing bad. They looked like they were doing pretty well. But the father's like, nope, we're going to change up. This is a genius idea. Let's do this. And that business did not do. At this point, when I was watching, I'm like, geez, whatever noodle shop this kid likes, he is a curse. I like a new shop. Well, we're going to close up shop or we're going to change our business. And pile on top of that, the son of the noodle shop lady gets cut in his leg. There's like a fight at the school that they were in, and someone had a knife, and they cut him in his leg. And it looked like they cut him in the Achilles. Dad looks like someone was jealous of him, or that's a horrible cut. And next thing you know, the couple that was originally running the noodle shop decides to reopen the noodle shop. This is after some time has gone by, of course. The husband, decides to now take part of the family business, and the son who was cut actually looks like he's taking part of it too. At this point, he was like on crutches, but they're doing what they can to get by. Fast forward into adulthood. Our narrator is now a grown man, and he's talking about living in Beijing still. He's having noodles just the same. The place he's having noodles is kind of like a McDonald's. He's like, I'll have the noodles, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll give you a number 12. He says, he gives a great description of it. Essentially, everything's more mass produced. You'll have machined noodles, which are okay, they're bland. You'll get your broth, but you'll get less ingredients, less toppings, and a higher price. And it happens every year. It's just supply and demand. And he's like, you just don't get that feeling that you used to get. All of a sudden, at this point, when he's going through all this descriptives, he gets a call, and it's his father asking him to come home because of his grandmother. He flies out to see his grandmother, and you get a scene where he's by her bedside, and she's holding his hand, and she tells him, I'm so sorry, I'm not going to be able to get you those noodles anymore. And he tells her, you don't have to worry about that. And she passes away. You can kind of tell he has a moment of reflection where he's actually thinking about, like, they don't really narrate what he's actually thinking about, but then he walks back into his old town and he sees the noodle shop where the boy that was injured is still there with his father and his mother. He orders a bowl of noodles. He sits down, hears a bicycle, sees a girl ride by, and for a moment you think it's gonna be the girl he had a crush on. It's not. It's just another girl in middle school. And he just realizes there's a lot of things that changes in life. Some things actually still stay the same. And he kind of feels a sense of peace when he eats the noodles, from what I can see. I honestly don't know the full meaning of that first short story, but for me, it had its own purpose. That first story for me had to deal with loss and change. It was a difficult part to get through. At the beginning, I was enjoying it due to the noodles and so forth like that. And then they throw in the whole grandmother bit, which I thought the first story was going to deal with one aspect. I thought it was going to deal with childhood change. Maybe like somehow he sees like the owners from the first shop somewhere else and he sees that recollection there. But it's more having to deal with the acceptance of loss. It's something that everybody has to go through. And you remember the fondness of your youth in a lot of different ways. And I've said this before, it's the simple things that make things worthwhile. I've lost relatives, and everybody has lost a relative here and there. It's a thing of life. The funny thing is, I've had my own grandparents that I've lost. Some of the biggest memories I have is around the table eating with them. And it's such a simple connection. You can easily just focus on what was great about that meal, but it was that connection around that meal that made it. So the very first story ends pretty quickly. It's not very long. Moves into the next one, which is called A Small Fashion Show. When I started watching this one, I thought, okay, here's another narration point. Fortunately, it doesn't go into that. It goes more into an actual short film, less narration. And it's basically a girl talking about how she is living her life as a fashion model, that she's gotten to her career point because of essentially her genetics, that she's grateful for her parents, that she grew up tall and beautiful. Because of this, she was able to live the life that she wants to live. She doesn't really have too much in talents that she can think of, and her only regret is that she really doesn't spend as much time with her sister that she could. Her one regret is that as she was growing up, she didn't really spend as much time with her sister. Her parents passed away, and for reasons, her and her sister were separated. So she stayed with one section of the family, where the younger sister stayed with another section of the family. But as she grew older and got into the fashion career, she was eventually able to reconnect with her younger sister and let her younger sister live with her. Now, as a full-grown woman, she is displaying the signs of that she's no longer driven. She's happy she can be with her sister, but when she gets talked to by like the higher-ups, you could tell that she's not really driven, but she's always in her work. She's stuck at her job while her sister's at home. One scene where her sister's baking her a cake, sent her a message. It's like, I made you a birthday cake. You coming by? At the same time, she's having a birthday cake at her job, and they're doing a big celebration. Everybody's there but her younger sister, and she sees that she missed the message. Her younger sister, who I'm just gonna call her by her name, Lulu, is home alone, now eating the cake that she made for her older sister, Yi Lin. I'm gonna focus on the party a little bit longer. So Yi Lin is thinking about leaving the party. She meets, I'm gonna assume, her boyfriend, who shows up. He's like, sorry I'm late. I brought you a bouquet of flowers for the job well done. And she's like, well, can you stay later? He's like, no, I still got work to do. And then as they're talking, a little girl shows up. I'm going to say she's a little girl because she's still in school, but she's old enough to do the fashion work. And as she's talking, her boyfriend takes one of the flowers from the bouquet and gives it to the little girl. And it's like, you got a promising future ahead of you and trying to be smooth. At this moment, I was like, wow, that is a horrible guy to be in a relationship with. I could easily tell right from that get-go. I'm like, either this guy is gonna be a person that, you know, just messed up one time, or he's gonna be a horrible guy to be in a relationship with. But I digress. Yi Lin shows back up the apartment with her sister Lulu and her manager Steve, and he shows up with her because she's drunk. She can't handle her liquor. And it's through this dynamic you realize Lulu pretty much handles all the stuff at home. She essentially takes care of Yi Lin. And in the background, you can see Lulu studying and sewing and doing a lot of sewing in the background, but she can handle a lot of stuff. Cut to Yi Lin's messing up. She overslept a gig. She realizes that some jobs are being taken away from her, and they're going to that same little girl that was chatting it up with her at the party because she's younger and she has a certain look. And Yi Lin is actually concerned about her career. She's concerned about her future. And she's like, you overlook things when you're at the top. So now she's going through trying to lose more weight, exercise more, and you see her manager and her sister are warning her, like, you need to be cautious, you need to be careful. And she's pushing herself. She's constantly pushing herself because she wants to keep that beauty, keep that look, and keep the things going. And you can see visibly these people who are close to her are concerned. It gets to a point where one of the runway shoots that they do, she passes out as she's walking. And I suspect she hurt her leg because she ended up in the hospital, and they said that she couldn't work while her leg is healing. Cut to after her leg heals up, she tells her sister that she's planning on quitting. And Lulu's asking why, and she pretty much says, I'm too old for this. I no longer care. I don't have the drive. And Lulu asks her, so what do you plan on doing? She's like, I don't know. I'll figure something out. And she turns over and she sees Lulu sewing, and she goes, you do a lot of sewing. You mind teaching me? I can learn a new trade, you know, can pick up a new hobby. And Lulu's offended. She is upset. And they have a little bit of a fight, and it gets to a point where Yi Lin essentially tells her, I've been doing all this for you. I've been pretty much putting bread on the table, essentially. Lulu storms out. And I don't know, a week goes by. Yi Lin gets a letter after she talks to Steve, her manager, to tell him, you know, I'm planning on quitting kind of situation. And he tells her, listen, if you quit, I quit. It's that simple, because apparently you're too old. I'm too old for this. Everybody just leaves me. So I might as well just retire too. But before you do, go to this job. And she does. Not because of the fact that he was being sweet. He was actually being very mean about it. He was teasing her and telling her that it's like she has a horrible chasing guys, that she pushes away her sister in order to get a rise out of her. And he tells her, like, that's the Yi Lin I know. The one who has passion. That's when he gives her a letter telling her to go to another location. And he tells her, don't be late this time. She shows up, and it turns out her sister's there. They look into the other room, and there's all these fashion designers and owners, and they're all in the other room. And she's like, what's going on? And she's like, put this on. And it's one of the clothes that she's been designing. Her sister has been going to school to learn to be a fashion designer. So she's made a bunch of clothes, and she wants her sister to wear it. Fast forward a few years later, it's Lulu narrating, and Lulu talks about how she's now designing clothes, and her sister gets to wear it. Every now and then they do private fashion shows, and her sister's always the model. And that's where it ends. For me, that was talking about a couple different things. One, life always isn't straightforward. You can get to a point where you may feel stagnant, and you may need to change it up. And then you get a curveball. And either A, you realize I can't be where I need to be, or I need to change something just so I can still continue with what I enjoy. And I need to value the things that I do enjoy. Secondly, it also talks about acknowledging those around you. If you have a talent or a skill, that's great. Focus on that talent and skill. Expand on it, grow with it. But never feel hurt, ashamed, or anything like that to rely on those around you for support. Because the people around you that will support you, they want you to succeed, but more importantly, they want you to be happy. And that's what I gathered. Like her manager technically was fine with her quitting, but he wants Yi-Lin to be happy. And he recognized that her sister has talent. Lulu loved her sister, Yi-Lin, and went to school, from what I can tell, because of her older sister. She felt inspired. She wanted to contribute to her sister's career and show that she can shine just as brightly, just in a different aspect. And through that aspect, it was through design and making clothes. And she was inspired by her own sister to do this. Third story, and the last story, is called Shanghai Love. This one having to do with young adult. He's in the corporate life. He's moving to another place. He's unpacking his stuff. And you can tell he's kind of struggling a little bit in the sense that they pan over back to a business meeting. Didn't go too well. He was going to be an architect. They kind of smashed his model, belittled him a little bit. He's a little bit upset about this. And he's unpacking his stuff into his new apartment with his best friend, whose name is Pan, and he finds a cassette deck in his box. And for anybody in my audience that's possibly a younger audience, cassette deck is what we had before DVDs and CDs. And this thing's covered in dust. And he's like, what is this? Pan tells him, oh, that must be the tape that was given to me by Zhao Yu. And he's like, what? Yeah, Zhao Yu. She gave me a tape. She told me to give it to you, but you were really busy at the time, so I gave it to your mom to give it to you. She told me not to listen to it, so I don't know what's on it, but she said it was very important. And then our main character runs out, whose name is Li Mo. And he runs out saying, it must still be there, because he doesn't have a tape deck. So you don't know where he's running to. But as he's running, they flash back to 1999, and this is in Shanghai. And you see it's a neighborhood. It's not that well, but you see Li Mo's grandparents and Zhao Yu, a girl who went to go visit. It's all three of them, Pan, Li Mo, and Zhao Yu. And they're all hanging around a boombox listening to music on a cassette. And as the day ends, Zhao Yu goes to leave and she hurts her ankle or her leg. Li Mo takes her home, and you see there's a conversation between the two where Li Mo offers to record the lessons in class on cassette so that Zhao Yu doesn't miss her schooling and she stays on task. And she asks him, if you want to leave a message on there for me, by all means, go ahead. You know, it could be funny or anything. And he does. He takes the lessons, and you see him in class with a big boombox in his lap, talking to it, trying to give her instructions on what to do for his studies. And then the story pans through, and you can tell that these two are essentially sharing the same cassette deck. And now, instead of taking lessons, they're just passing this deck back and forth between each other so they can send messages with each other. This was probably your version of not having a voicemail system. Obviously, they didn't have cell phones at that time, especially not smartphones. So this was probably the closest thing that they had for doing this messaging. And it was probably a low-key method of doing it. Come to middle school time, they're older now, and she tells Li Mo and Pan that she's planning on going to a school which is going to be a upper echelon, higher education school, but it's going to be requiring them to move. So Li Mo, Pan are both upset. Li Mo is at the dinner table with his parents and his grandparents. They're all praising Zhao Yu. They're like, that's a girl. If anybody can do it, she can do it. And Li Mo's a little bit upset. He's kind of getting ridiculed by his own parents. They're like, They ask him, what do you want to do for yourself? What school do you want to go to? And he says the same school as her. And they're like, really? Not in so many words. They have other things that they say, but there's a kind of sense of surprise. So he gets really upset, tells them that he plans to do it. And the father's like, all right, if you're going to be serious, then you need to clean up your room, get your act together, you need to study, you need to get on this. And at that point, Limo decides no longer to message Zhao Yu. They're no longer sharing the cassettes. He's really dialed in and focused on studying. We get to the scene where the cassette, the one in question that started this whole thing, comes in play. The mother shows up and she goes, hey, Pan came by to give you a cassette deck. It's from Zhao Yu. He says it's important you listen to it. And he goes, I don't have time. Put it in the box. I'll get to it. That's what happened to the cassette. It wasn't like the mom hid it or anything. She put it in and he just never really focused on it. Continuing on though, Limo gets into the school that he needs to get into. He's excited. He runs over to Zhao Yu's apartment and realizes Zhao Yu is not there. Now at this point, he's never told anybody but Pan what school they was planning on going to, and he didn't want to tell Zhao Yu in case he didn't get in. He didn't want to feel embarrassed. When he gets there, she's not there. She's actually in the hospital because it turns out she didn't get in, and her father was pissed. Turned into a domestic dispute situation. She got hurt. She went to the hospital. He never got to see her. The only moment he got to see her was when he was on moving day. He was leaving to move to be closer to the new school, and she was on an overpass bridge looking down and waving goodbye at him. And that was the last time he saw her until, they're getting older now. And every now and then she'll go to see him with Pan at his new place, but it's few and far between. And he talks about how they grew apart and they really weren't connecting anymore. And you can see that he's listening to his CD player while they're there, and he's not really socializing with them anymore. And at one point she asks him about the cassette, if he ever listened to it, and if he hasn't, he could just toss it out. And he goes, what cassette? And she's like, oh, never mind. And they even show him trying to walk her back home, but it's like there's a huge gap of distance. Like he's not walking with her, he's walking in front of her, like kind of like it's a burden that he has to walk with her. And she even asks him, did you really go to the school just for me? And he goes, no, I just wanted to prove something to my parents. And he's like, what would give you that idea? She goes, Pan. And he goes, oh, okay. No, that's not true. You should know better than listen to him. And after he tells her that, he finds out shortly after that she accepted a schooling in another country, America. And so she's now traveling abroad. So now he's like not seeing her at all. And she doesn't come by to visit, and that's it. Now we're back to the present, and Limo finally arrives at the destination he's been running all this time to. And it's his grandparents' house. By this point, the neighborhood's pretty demolished. They've been doing demolition work there. It's only his grandmother. His grandfather has passed away, and she's elderly, and he tells her, he's sorry I haven't been around. Do you still have that tape deck? She's like, yeah, okay. Sweet old lady. She's like, I haven't been cooking much. He's like, I'm not here for the cooking, but I appreciate it. You don't have to do that. She's like, at least let me get you some cookies. And she has one of those old tins that you open up and you can see she struggles with it. Makes you want to go visit your grandma. But I digress. He goes to his old room and he sees his boombox there and he puts the cassette deck in. He starts listening to it and he gets to a point where he's listening and he hears himself talk about how he wants to grow up and he wants to be like a sunflower, where he's always looking up at the sun with no regrets and just wants to continue on with the future. And then he hears the last recording, which was Zhao Yu, and she tells him, I want to be just like you. I want to be a sunflower too. I want to look at the future with no regrets. That's why I'm going to fail the exam, because I don't want to be in a world where I'm distant from you. And Limo breaks down crying. He is destroyed because he did care for Zhao Yu and he regretted everything. And he says, I can't rewind time. And he's like, I may never ever get to see her again. He's like, I did love her. Go into the future now. The neighborhood is cleaner. The house that his grandmother used to live in is no longer a house. It's a motel. From what I gather, him and his best friend Pan got together, bought the place, remodeled it into a motel bed and breakfast kind of situation. You can tell it's got some new design points. And Pan's introducing like this new couple into like a place to stay while he's running the front desk. And when he's yelling at Pan because Pan left the keys to the room behind, he turns over and standing in the doorway is a woman, and you just see her hair shining in the sunlight, and he looks at her and he freezes and she smiles back at him, and then you realize it's Zhao Yu. And that's pretty much where it ends right there. The third story is definitely my favorite one. It was able to drag everything together. Could be a standalone story. It dealt with loss, not really focusing on death, but loss of loved ones. And yes, they were kids, but you can have strong emotional tie. It's basically the one that got away. And the way they end it doesn't necessarily mean that it ends happily, but it means that there's a chance, or there means that there could be a sense of closure. That was enough for me. We don't know if she was in a new relationship, if she found someone that she truly loved, but you get that sensation that she did care for him and he cared for her. They went their separate ways without truly knowing how they felt about each other. That part is absolutely sad. But the fact that they could possibly have that moment of clearing the air and getting that closure is a strong thing. I did have the right sense of mind to stay for the end credits because it did have an end credit scene where you actually see all three stories overlap at the airport, where the first guy from story one is sitting in his chair looking at the airplane. You see Yi Lin and Lulu walking in the airport ready to take a flight for another job, and then here comes our three characters from the last story coming in because they're gonna escort Zhao Yu back on the plane. And for me, I thought that was touching. That's a nice way to say all these things happen in the world, whether you realize it or not, and everybody's going through their own experiences of growth and development in life. Everybody's going to be different, but in a sense, we're all the same because we all have to grow. And I thought that was beautiful. So now that we've talked in depth about the story, let's recap without the spoilers. This is 3 stories, all depicted in one universe. The first one I enjoyed for the art styling. The narration of it is very descriptive, and the artwork done to amplify the narration is great. It makes you really connect in the sense of visually what this character is describing emotionally and flavor-wise. It's very food-driven, but we can all connect to food and we can all connect to flavors. So it's definitely driving home that sensation. The second story for me, it was actually the least favorable of the two, which is odd because it did have a lot of story in it and a lot of substance, but I just didn't connect to it as well. And it's still pretty good though, because you grasp what they're trying to depict in the story about learning to adjust, or when you're feeling stuck and having others around you to pick you back up. Third story is my personal favorite. That one, I felt like it could easily run off to do its own movie. They could have expanded it more and just focused on a movie all by itself. And they all deal with some kind of loss as a whole. All 3 of them. They all deal with a loss. But considering that we're talking about a movie that's only an hour and 14 minutes long, and you're arguably around 20 minutes per short story, it felt like a full-on film each time I was watching. As I'm watching them, it doesn't feel like it's 30 minutes and they're just zooming by. I could have easily stopped at any one of these as soon as they hit the credits for that first story, the credits on the second story, or the third. I could have stopped and been like, I'm content right now. That could have been a movie experience for me. And it was less than 30 minutes long. That's because it was bringing you in. This, I feel, is a little bit difficult for me to rate. I'm going to rate this movie a 2 out of 5 NerdTots. And the reason I'm going that route, well, there's actually a couple. But if I was just focusing on the third story, I honestly probably would have given it a 4, because I really did enjoy the third story a lot. The second and first stories, they're really good. Don't get me wrong. It's just it didn't sit with me as well. Every short story, and this is probably one of the problems with an anthology film, is they're not all the same story, and they all have different pacings. I've experienced this with multiple films that are like this. One of my personal favorites is 4 Rooms. It's a live action film done with several different directors, and there are multiple short stories. And I love that film. But anybody who's watched that film, you have a favorite short story. And it's the same here. You have a favorite short story, and the others, when you're watching that, they're competing. They compete for it. So you're fighting for which one do you enjoy, which one is going to be better than the other. And when you have that competition, it's good in that experience, but it takes away from the whole. So unless you hit it out the park with every single short story, and you can feel great about everyone that comes down the line, it actually takes away from the film. So because of that, I feel like it's not as strong as it could have been. I could easily see this going to a 4 for a person if you're really being drawn into each story and they're captivating you each and every time. The first one, I thought it was like more like food porn, in all honesty, and I was being captivated, and then they throw a curveball my way, and that got my attention. Second one, I was getting intrigued, but I wasn't really connecting to it. That's why I did not like number 2. And 3 just really connected with me. I loved the whole aspect of it on 3. This is one of those ones where it's okay to break it down in portions. If you want to watch an anime, but you don't have a lot of time in your day, you have maybe 20 to 30 minutes, and you don't really want to binge watch anything, give this a go. Hit play, watch the first short story, pause it, do your own thing, and you can come back and watch a new one. And it's a new take, it's a new story, and you watch that one. And it's not heavily action packed, but it's that literal story. And I think that will be a good place for people to watch and enjoy. So this is something I would say is a palate cleanser as far as anime goes, because a lot of anime out there is like action, suspense. They're heavy on those genres. So you pick a genre that's heavy. This one, it's drama, and it deals with loss and romance, but it's not gonna break you, but it will keep you captivated. And I think that's really a good place to be. I watched it all 3 back to back. If you skip to the end of this, I would encourage watch the end credits at the end. It will make sense. On that note, yeah, I enjoyed this film. Once again, if you like this review, show it. Click like, hit subscribe. I'm gonna see about doing more films. I have more films lined up to come out to you. If you have a suggestion, or if you have seen this movie and you have your own opinion, put it in the comments. I'll take a look. I want to see what you guys say. If you haven't seen it, watch it and tell me what you see. And tell me how you feel. Otherwise, as always, continue watching anime, expand your minds, and just be excellent. Laters.
Let's go.